right, well, let's get started. I will do as much tap dancing as I can for the next couple of minutes while people join us. Welcome to Igniting Leadership. With all the technical difficulties we've had, it seems like a perfect evening to talk about elevating professionalism. I'm Kelly Newman. I'm president of the communication strategies firm Newman & Newman and a member of Ignite's board of directors. This is the third in our series of virtual conversations, and with us this evening is Dr. Ellen Friedman. Dr. Friedman, in addition to her work as a surgeon in otolaryngology at Texas Children's Hospital, is also director of the Center for Professionalism in Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. So, Friedman, thank you so much. We're so looking forward to what you have to share with us this evening, and I apologize for a bit of a late start.
It's fine. It's great to see you, Kelly.
Let me start with housekeeping for those of you who are joining us.
Oh my goodness.
Emily Reiser with TMC Innovation has been gracious enough to offer her assistance with this. And so we will be taking those breaks and asking Emily to represent you and ask your questions when we get to that point. Because we are starting a bit late, we'll probably go over a little bit because Dr. Friedman has so much to share. So we hope that you'll be able to stay with us. So Dr. Friedman, let's jump right in. Medical professionals, of course, are highly respected for their expertise. Tell me about the center's mission for elevating professionalism.
Yes, professionalism is a fundamental in healthcare for all healthcare professionals. And it is an expectation, and it is actually also a core competency demanded by all training programs. So professionalism as a cornerstone in the past was just considered part of life. It was just expected and everyone complied. But over the years, especially with maybe the commercialization of medicine, there have been many distractors, and people have gotten off track. And so it used to be that professionalism was taught by role models, and now there's a new philosophy that there needs to be more didactic, more teaching, formal teaching of professionalism, and there needs to be more attention and self-regulation in terms of lapses in professionalism. So those are two of the main reasons why the center was formed.
Well, that's interesting. So there's a movement towards, say, purposeful professionalism, then you might say.
Right. To think about professionalism with intention, so that it isn't just something that you kind of pick up by osmosis, because some of the role models that you may encounter may not be the finest role models. So the idea is, in order to really instill professionalism in the culture, to take it into a more formal direction, to really assure that it's part of the culture. And this basically has been shown to be valuable and to have an enormous return on investment based on better patient outcomes, fewer lawsuits, less mistakes, higher retention of the workforce, easier recruitment. There are just many, many benefits to having a highly professional and positive work environment that is heightened, that is demonstrated through heightened professionalism.
So we're going to get into a lot of specifics that are relatable to the folks that are participating in this webinar tonight. But overall, are there lapses that you see in professionalism that have relevance to leaders other than physicians?
Oh, I think that the types of lapses in professionalism that occur among physicians are universal. I mean, I don't think they're limited to physicians. I think that although we do categorize them in different groups, I think they pretty much all relate to difficulties in either assessing personal relationships or communication. I think that those are the two major bundles that they come into. I mean, there are many subclasses, but pretty much it goes back to someone not understanding a social situation and missing some social cues, and some communication difficulties. So I think that those are universal. I don't think they're unique in the medical profession. I think that those are the same issues that haunt people in all walks of life. I think, but I think what is different is that in healthcare, people are more vulnerable that you encounter. So I think the way you respond to them and the way you treat them is more impactful. And I also think that people hold individuals in healthcare to a higher standard and have higher expectations, so that your behavior really does make a bigger impact, a bigger difference.
Yeah, I think so. Well, let's jump into emotional intelligence. I know that that is a important component for professionalism. So can you talk to us a little bit about the role emotional intelligence plays in professionalism? And can you start too by defining the difference between emotional intelligence and IQ?
Yes, yes. IQ, or your innate intelligence, is what we usually measure in those horrible standardized tests when we're in grammar school, and it's what you're born with. It's your native intelligence. Emotional intelligence, the good news is that you're not born with it, and you can develop it, and so you can actually improve. And very often, some of the most intelligent people in terms of their IQ may actually have the lowest emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to read emotions and situations from your point of view, but also from another's point of view. And so it's connected to empathy, actually, also. And so the need for emotional intelligence is extremely important. And actually, its origins were in the business community. I think it was initially introduced in business education for executives and for more along organizations that were like for-profit organizations and leadership in those kinds of organizations. And it's only recently being recognized as a key factor in healthcare, but it really is a very important factor in healthcare.
So you mentioned being able to learn emotional intelligence. Can you talk about the 3 skills that you relate to emotional intelligence, and what is it that how can we benefit from developing those skills?
Yes, actually, there's just a ton of pop literature about emotional intelligence, and some of them are rather dense to read, and some of them are very easy to read. And the 3 factors that I usually talk about are not the standard pillars that are talked about in some of the books, but I picked them because they are areas where you can really work on them. And it's a skill set, just like any other skill set. The more, and just like exercising muscles or exercising behavior, you get better at it. And I believe that you do truly get better, and you'll reap benefits by working on these 3 skills. And I did want to say that I think some of the people that I work with become encouraged when they realize that this is totally uncoupled from your IQ. So it doesn't mean that you're not smart. You can be super smart and actually still be socially quite awkward and have difficulties with these skills. So the 3 skills that I generally speak about and have courses for members of the Baylor community concern communication, appreciation, and empathy. And so these three skills are actually pretty broad. There are many different types of communication involved, but today, especially, not especially today, always, communication is really an art. There's a saying that I think that communication seems simple, but that's an illusion. And the truth is that communicating, the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of information seems so straightforward. Something we started doing at the age of 2 or 3, we've been down talking, and seems like it's easy. But actually, there are a lot of minefields. And so I think one of the things that I enjoy talking about, and I think might be pertinent to this group of women, is problems with email communications. There are 3 components of communication, basically. There are the words that you use, there's the tone of your voice, and there is your body language. And so when you're communicating in person, you get contributions from all 3 of those. You get the actual words, you hear the tone of voice, and you see the body language. And so that means that face-to-face communication is extremely rich. I mean, not only that, it's also immediate. If there's a misunderstanding, you can say, wait a minute, what did you mean by that? Or you know, or I didn't think that was funny. What do you mean? And you can ask for clarification. And on the telephone, I mean, you don't see the body language, but you still have the voice and you still have the tone of voice. But in
Right.
email, you only have the words. And I can talk about each form of communication for an hour itself, but I think I know you don't want me to do that. But in terms of emails, I think emails are a really important issue for women executives. I think it's important for everyone because it's extremely easy to be misunderstood in an email. And I make plenty of email mistakes. Believe me, we've all made them. And I think that something that I think that shows high emotional intelligence is really paying attention to your email skills. I mean, you know, the old saying, never send an email when you're angry or upset. I always reread my emails. I make sure that I'm sending it to the person for whom it is intended and not the entire copy list, which is all, you know, which is a frequent problem. I think everybody has received one of those emails that says, Mary Sue would like to retract the last email. And, you know, when I get that email, I immediately look to see what it is, you know, to see
Oh,
what kind of,
absolutely.
don't you?
Wait,
Right.
I missed
And
something
so
good.
you can't retract your emails, you know, I mean, you can
Right.
send that little announcement, but it's still out there.
Right.
So I think there's just a lot of issues with emails that I see a lot of problems with them.
So is what you're saying is that to fuel your emotional intelligence in a given moment, you need to be able to read these different things, that these things are all giving you insight into, well, even being able to show empathy, because to your example of email, I may not recognize that a member of my team is under duress or whatever if I'm just taking the factual tone of an email. And so for me to exercise emotional intelligence in that leadership moment, you're saying I need those other that other form of communication.
I think that actually, I'm not sure that's exactly what I mean, but something you just touched on is something that I think is really important. I think something that I really try to emphasize when I'm giving lectures and stuff is the fact that all of the people on your team have backstories, just like we have backstories.
Mhm.
And I think that when you have good emotional intelligence, you are very aware of that. And
Okay.
at any given day, you don't know what happened to that person on their way into work. You don't know, you know, someone's mother could be terminally ill, someone's dog could have recently died, their children could be on drugs. I mean, people have lots of backstories. And no matter what, I think as professionals, we try to bring our best selves to work. I know I try every day to bring my best self,
Mhm.
but sometimes the outside pressures are really daunting. And so I think that when you have high emotional intelligence in all forms of communication, I think you try to give people a little bit of grace. Now, I don't mean that that means you overlook rude or disrespectful communication, but I do try to give people some wiggle room because I don't know what's going on in their life, and I know that my own comments could either push people down or rise people up, lift them up. And I want to be a lifter upper, not a
Right.
smusher.
Right, right, right. Okay, so emotional intelligence is something that you're exercising. So it's an awareness. You're assessing on all those different levels, but you're bringing into those encounters and empathy and appreciation, setting aside, making up stories on why someone is behaving or using even the kind of tone or inflection that they are, and maybe getting curious and digging into, this is what I'm reading. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay,
And sometimes I'll even ask the person, I'm getting a vibe that, are you upset about something? I mean, you have to be careful how you use all those things.
sure.
You threw in appreciation there in your last comment. And I think appreciation is another thing that's missing in our workforce. I think everyone has high expectations of themselves and everyone they work with. And very often we overlook expressing any gratitude or appreciation. And I think that's very disappointing, and it's not demonstrating excellent emotional intelligence, because actually Stephen Covey said that one of the most primal human needs is the need beyond physical survival is the need for appreciation. And I think that people, we all really need it. I mean, I'm not saying we need stars on our refrigerator every day or insincere words, but
Right.
people don't have to help you. I mean, they don't, they don't really have to extend themselves. And I think in healthcare, people really do extend themselves and they are really trying hard and they do come to work always trying to do a good job. And very frequently they only hear about a job that's something they've done wrong. I
Right.
mean, and
Right.
everyone talks about, oh, we don't want to be a punitive environment, but it doesn't matter what they say they want. It ends up that there's a lot of times where there are lists of people who are behind on something or people who didn't sign up. I mean, there's just a lot of negativity with all of that. And I honestly think that all people, men and women, thrive. They're more productive. They're more collaborative with a little bit of positive feedback, a little bit of encouragement. So I think that that's another trait of people who have emotional intelligence is that they can give meaningful, positive feedback and positive encouragement. And I
So
think it's very powerful.
this is a perfect segue, and hopefully I can hold on to this thought in my head. So as you know, Ignite was founded to enhance the proficiency, entrepreneurial talent of women leaders in healthcare. And my cleaning crew has hit the first floor. So my apologies if anyone starts to hear that in the background. And so I'm curious to know, as I'm sure our participants this evening would be, what distinctions or concerns that you have seen for women in professionalism versus male. And I'm going to jump ahead and ask you one question that tees off of what you were just talking about, emotional
Mhm.
intelligence. Is there, and this is being just totally sexist in this question, but is there a feeling in general among male leaders that to exercise or demonstrate emotional intelligence is a weakness? And if a woman leader is demonstrating emotional intelligence, is she compromising herself by appearing to be, soft or weak or whatever? Let's
Mhm.
use emotional intelligence to segue into what women leaders need to be particularly aware of.
Mm. Well, I think there are always those thoughts, and I have heard a lot of male executives think of emotional intelligence and even professionalism as the soft stuff, and that it's like fluff. But the truth is that there's an enormous body of literature looking at the return on investment for high emotional intelligence and for professionalism. And it pays off in many, many, many ways. And I mean, they actually have financial calculations that miscommunication and poor communication cost over $5 million a year for an average 500-bed hospital. And that's just communication issues. So there are many, many efforts to document the financial impact of poor emotional intelligence and poor professionalism. So I think that the crowd is getting shifted to recognizing it. Now, I'm not saying men are as good at it as women, but I'm sure you can think of an individual who's a man or a woman where you say, you know what, being with them is always more upbeat. It's encouraging. It livens me up. It makes me feel energetic. It's stimulating and positive. And usually those people will have high emotional intelligence. So I think that if anybody downplays it, it's a big miscalculation, actually. So, and I think that sometimes people will poo-poo it, mainly when they don't understand it or they haven't, or even they haven't read the literature about the return on investment, because sometimes that's the only thing that gets people's attention. But I think most people know that they have those work environment surveys, the happiest place to work in Houston, and all of that is based on emotional intelligence, and that has gotten executives' attention, and it has motivated things that even if they're not authentic, like really strong, earnest emotional intelligence, they want to put lipstick on a pig to make sure that it looks like they have the
Right.
warmest, most positive work environment.
So have you developed insights that women leaders need to be aware of in their professionalism that you can share?
Well, I'm not a social scientist, and as a woman, sort of a woman leader myself, have felt the double edge of the gender issues. I think we're all very familiar with the issues where, that the old saying, what's the difference between assertive and aggressive gender?
Yeah.
And and it's basically that this different adjectives are really used for women than are used for men for very similar behavior. And
Yeah.
the thing that I guess, and all of that's really true. I mean, I've seen it repeatedly about, using these different adjectives that are really repeated all the time in the literature. The thing that's the problem with all of that is that you may play the gender card too often as a woman. And actually, one of the things when I was thinking about tonight is that I was thinking about one of the real values of your organization is that it's an opportunity for women to speak totally honestly and openly with other women and not be perceived as whiny or complaining or needy, which are sometimes how women who come with issues are thought of in a professional setting. So I think that this organization really meets a very, very important need for women, and at least from what I know about your organization. But I think, oh my goodness, this is a wonderful opportunity to be able to strategize with other women and think about approaches that have worked for people in different situations and trying them out. So that you don't have to expose yourself when you could be more vulnerable. So I think kudos for making this organization.
Well, nicely done plug. We can't thank you enough for that. So
Well, I get $1.50 at the end of this, right?
the check's in the mail. We're going to take some questions. So I hope that some of you have submitted some specific questions that you might have that
No.
relate to some of the situations. Emily shaking her head no.
I have a couple of other points for women that I can
Yeah,
talk about.
that's fine. As you know,
And
we can just go all
yeah,
night with this conversation. So please, I'm interested in especially practical examples.
yeah. I think that so maybe all of the women in your group, or there may be 3 people on this call, I don't know, but maybe they all have coaches or something. But something that I've figured out that men do that I don't think women do is they have the pre-meeting meeting. And I don't know if you've ever been at a meeting where something comes up and it seems like everybody at the table already knows about it and there's already kind of been a consensus or something, and you think, wow, I didn't get the playbook, I didn't know about that. And
Right.
I think that a lot of men, and now I'm doing it too, have pre-meeting meetings. So when there's going to be a big decision made, this is really unrelated to the Center for Professionalism, but it's just a women's tip that I think.
Yeah.
I think that women, that men do that, and I wasn't aware of it. So now I do it. And so before the meeting where the real decision is going to be made, I meet with a couple of the key players, the decision makers, and I kind of put out my pitch. And so it's already familiar to them, and they already get to mention, I get a little early feedback as to what to tweak. And anyway, the pre-meeting meeting is a very helpful tool that I think women could benefit from. And
well, let me interrupt you and ask you
sure.
a question though. Sorry, hold on to that other thought. Why is it that you think that men are more inclined to do that than women? I'm just curious to know, is it that we've been taught to like follow the rules or something, and therefore you're to come and make your presentation at the meeting, don't jump the gun, and like it's cheating somehow to have pre-meeting meetings?
I think that women just thought the meeting is where it all happens. I mean, I really, to me, I didn't not do that because I thought it was against the rules or that it would be pushy or anything. I didn't do it because I didn't know it was done, and I didn't really want to waste anyone's time or ask for special consideration. I just really wasn't aware that that was kind of a standard thing that men do.
Right.
So
Interesting. Okay, well,
I
that's
have some more.
okay. And please continue. I'm sorry to have jumped in, but I was like, wait.
No, well, I guess the other thing is, oh wait, so there are questions coming in, I guess, but
Well, say your one thing, and then we'll ask Emily to jump in with those questions.
okay. I think that as a woman executive, it's important to know that it's lonely at the top. And I think the reason I think that it's important to know, and that's another reason why I think that this organization could be so helpful.
Mhm.
Because when as a leader, almost always I'm the only woman in the group. I have photographs. I was the director of the American Board of Otolaryngology. It was an 8-year term, and for the entire 8 years, I was the only woman. And basically, it's kind of lonely because you don't have buddies. I mean, I didn't play golf with the guys. I don't really drink. I mean, I care about a lot of different things, maybe you would say. And the reason I think that that's why it's important to maintain your friendships with women and your relationships with women so that you have a support system, because most of the men are not intentionally leaving you out. I mean, that's another thing, is that men somehow take nothing personally. I mean, they can argue at a meeting. I mean, like, be yelling at each other, and then they go out and have a beer together. Okay, so women don't do that. I mean, once we've argued, I'm done. I don't want to have a beer with you. I don't want to eat with you at dinner. I mean, it's kind of over. And so we really do seem to have kind of different approaches. But I think that because even though it's changing, there are fewer women who are at the top. I think that the opportunity to develop friendships with women and support networks with women are really, really helpful. And there are all kinds of things that will come up in those discussions that men are talking about that I was even completely unaware of. One example is coaching. I didn't realize that every male chairman of a department has a coach. I was the chairman of a department. I didn't have a coach. I didn't even know about it. And I mean, I don't think it was conspiracy where they all said, don't let Friedman know. I don't think so, but I never heard about it. And so I didn't know to ask for it. So I think that you should really invest in your female friendships, and this type of organization honestly fills an important role in that regard, in my opinion.
I would have to agree. I agree. Okay, Emily, we have some questions.
It's a great link to the next question from somebody who's an entrepreneur who had a question about how to communicate to a room full of investors or venture capitalists that are more than 80% male. So walking into that room, how to manage that situation, especially around the communications.
Around what was the last part of that?
Like the communications, how to manage the communication strategy in a room full of male investors, or that you're pitching to or trying to get, collaboration or buy-in from.
Okay. Okay. Well, the biggest thing is to prepare. I think that sometimes you think you can wing it, or the material backwards and forwards. I mean, it's your company. But you know what? I'm sure you've seen Shark Tank, where people go in there and they know every number. And then there are other people who say, I think last year it was something like, no, when you go to an important meeting, when I go to any meeting, I try not to be caught off guard. And so I literally prepare for every meeting. I even prepare my talk. And as a woman, I frequently am speaking to all male audiences. I am careful about being kind of formal, actually. And I think there are some things that women do when they're speaking, like they end each sentence going up. There's a actual phrase for that. It's upending, and it sounds like a little girl asking a question. And I think it's very important to practice your presentation so that you have a very controlled and polished presentation. So I think it's unfortunate that probably women may have to spend more time really crafting their presentation, but I think it's worth it because they're listening for different things maybe, and it's just really important to have practice and to really have prepared for the presentation.
I think that's good advice. And I think overall, what that does is it influences your presence. What is the level of confidence? What is your presence going into that room? Because you can command confidence without being defensive or argumentative. But I think you're right. And for a lot of people, the more prepared you are, the more casual you can be. It's like
it can appear casual, but
right.
you've done the work so you know how to,
Right. Okay.
And I also think it's important how you dress. I don't think that women have to come dressed, like a nun or anything, but I think that I think you kind of set the tone too. And so I don't think it has to always be a navy blue suit. I mean, you can wear colors like the colors that women wear, but I think that you need to put some attention to all of those details.
Yeah, I think there's some good lessons that we learned early in our career that need reminding. Emily, did you have another question before we move on to the next section?
We do. We have a couple more questions. One around what to do when we observe unprofessional behavior. How can we bring it up while maintaining our professionalism through that discussion?
Well, that's a really great question. I love that question. It's very variable because it depends on what kind of unprofessional. Unprofessional behavior is extremely broad. So I'm going to pick an example, and if I'm missing the type of thing that the person is interested in, you can ask another way. But I think that some of the most disturbing things that you can observe are attempts at bullying or belittling other people, or those microaggressions that are, talked about so frequently. And I actually think what you can do depends on the hierarchy of everyone involved, because in medicine, there is a very pronounced hierarchy everyone knows exactly where you stand in it. But it doesn't mean that if you're not at the top of the hierarchy, that you don't have to do anything. First thing you could do is, even physically, you could go and stand next to the person who is being targeted. And I think that is really helpful, because usually those kinds of belittling activities are intentionally trying to isolate that person or make them feel small. And so if you even physically just stand next to them, I think sometimes it would take extreme bravery to be able to say to the boss, that was not a very kind thing you just said. But if you go and stand with them, with the person who's the target, just physically, that's a really good help. Sometimes you can act like you didn't understand what they said and you're curious, and you could say, well, excuse me, but I think I misunderstood you. What did you mean when you said that? And then sometimes they have to think more, and then they realize how it sounded, and they may change their words, as an example. I think depending on the severity of the contact, you could talk to that individual afterwards, both individuals, the target and the perpetrator. You could say to the other person, I know that must have felt bad, don't worry, you're not in it alone. A little encouragement, I guess. And you could talk to the person who did it and say, that's not. Another thing I sometimes say is, that hasn't been my experience. That's like, if they say, if I've been where they'll say, you're really lazy, and and they'll kind of be berating someone. And then, and this does take age or balls or something, but I might say, well, that hasn't been my experience. I think she's been a really hard worker. And so I might say, that's funny that you would say that, because that hasn't been my experience. So those are some of the things that I use to deflect that kind of behavior.
And I know we've got some more questions, and we're going to take another question break, but you brought up something that makes a perfect segue into the takeaway information I know that you're going to provide us too. And I think that as women leaders, part of the coaching that we're called on to do for our team members is to address their professionalism. And if we see a team member, in particular a woman, who may be, and this is true especially, I think, for younger team members too, because there is, when you talk about the clothing, I think that women my age were taught in their career to be a little bit more conservative than, say, the younger women that are early in their career. And so as a leader, I think that it is important for you to pull people aside and coach them on their professionalism, whether it's something as innocuous as their inflection or misuse of vocabulary or their appearance, or even giving them those opportunities to shine and to grow in their own leadership skills. So this leads us to the next section I want you to address, and that is that very oftentimes as the director of the Center for Professionalism, you are called on to remediate. And basically they're saying, I can't do this, will you come and do it for me? So can you talk about remediation, especially in the realm of professionalism, and then we can get into some specific methods that you can share with us.
Mhm. I think that something that's really interesting about this topic is that a lot of times these problem people, I think the literature says that 10% of your group causes 80% of your problems. And that's really pretty much true, that there's a handful of people who end up being troublemakers or problem people, bad actors. But what happens is that along the way, people haven't stopped them. People haven't called them on their behavior. And I think that a lot of leaders, and I know this is something that we were going to talk about, I think a lot of people, leaders, are averse to confrontation. I mean, like, I don't really like confrontation. I mean, there are people who love confrontation, but they're usually sociopaths, you know? So for normal people who don't love confrontation, I think that they make a mistake by thinking that by not giving useful feedback along the way, that they're kind of preserving the relationship, or they're maintaining a friendship, and or that, you know, they don't want to be misinterpreted, or they think, well, who am I to say that they're not that good at this? I mean, I'm not perfect myself. You know, there are all of these barriers to giving feedback. But honestly, you're doing a disservice to everyone when that happens, and that's really sad, because without feedback, I literally do believe that feedback is 100% an opportunity. And, you know, everybody loves positive feedback. No one loves it more than I. But the truth is, the only way you get to calibrate how you're doing, where you're going, and grow is when you get corrective feedback. And I give talks on feedback, but one of the images that I like to talk about is if you were getting tennis lessons from a tennis coach, and the tennis coach said to you, oh my God, that's great. You're doing great. That's wonderful. Oh, perfect. You're doing great. I mean, you wouldn't want to pay that person, because you want them to say, look, you should put more weight on your right foot now. Now shift to your left. Hold it. No, hold it. No. That's the way to hold it. So you know that to get better at tennis, you need that constructive input. And I think that it's really the same in all areas of life. And I think that it's kind of cowardly. That sounds a little strong, but to not really be, I think that's another example of emotional intelligence, to know how to, I mean, there are all different ways to give feedback. I mean, if you say, oh my God, you're a stupid idiot, that's not going to help you. That's not going to help anyone grow. It's not going to get higher performance from the individual. But I really think that women executives have to learn, I think all executives have to learn how to give corrective feedback in a palatable way that is respectful, and that it's very clear and very specific, instead of these global, even positive feedback. When it's global, you don't even know what element you did that was successful. When you said that was great, right, that doesn't mean anything other than, but if you said, you know, the slides you made with those 4 colors and carrying the 4 colors through the whole talk, that really pulled it together. Then the individual goes, okay, so that guy cares about my slides. So making something specific is really, really helpful.
I think you're right. And I think that all of us can think of times where, you know, think of how, oh my gosh, I would be just horrified to learn maybe 6 months later that something I had been doing, unbeknownst to me, was totally inappropriate. I mean, I would crawl under a rock. I think that, you know, people, they don't know how. I mean, they don't know how to address it. So I think it's the how, and I think it's when, to your point, that you don't let too much time go And I think they're assuming that, people can't take bad news, so to speak. So what are some of the practical methods that you can share with us as leaders that, what to be looking for when it's time to, and remediation is really that escalated point. I mean, it's really, ultimately, you don't want to get to remediation. If you've
Right.
done it right, you've circumvented the situation in advance. So are there some methods that you can share with us?
Well, I think the biggest rule is that positive feedback should be given in a crowd and constructive feedback should be given in private. So when you think someone's doing a great job, it's really lovely to let their contemporaries know about it. But if you think someone has deficiencies or areas for growth, you should do that, of course, in private. I think it's also, like you said, I think sometimes people give feedback the day the person is leaving that rotation or when the internship is over. And that's really a shame because the individual doesn't have time to incorporate your suggestions and try them out and see if they improve. And so I think it's really good to have scheduled feedback sessions so that everybody in the group says that they know that in every 3 months, they're going to have a brief session. I don't mean, an hour and 50 minutes, a brief session where they're going to get feedback. And what's really cool is if you say, every 3 months, we're going to have a feedback session. I want feedback from you and I'm going to give you feedback. Now, the truth is, most people aren't going to give their boss like significant feedback, but I think it's still good to express an interest and a willingness because I think leaders are making mistakes left and right, and it's really hard to get feedback when you're a leader. So, but anyway, I think it's important to let everyone know to expect feedback on a regular basis, and that the whole purpose of the feedback to set the tone for the discussion is to help them be the most successful and the most effective. And that's the only, if you're giving them feedback that isn't with that destination and that aspiration of helping them grow and be more effective and more successful, then that's not feedback, that's gossip or something else. But so I think the idea is to make sure that you have regularly scheduled feedback sessions, that you let them know what the intention is, that we reinforce that the intention is 100% to help them be successful, and always speak respectfully and to carry out it in private. I think that those, and be specific. So I think sometimes people say, well, you're just too disorganized. I think people need to hear, when you tried to present that patient, the notes fell on the ground, you didn't, and let them know exactly what you're talking about. And because people are very bad at assessing themselves, I mean, there are people who think that they are horrible, that they just did a terrible job, and they could have been one of the best talks you've heard all year. And there are other people who absolutely bombed, and they go, man, I'm really not that one. I was great. And so you can't really tell about yourself. And that's why feedback is so powerful when it's done properly.
Right, exactly. And I think it's also important, we hear so often about providing that safe environment to be able to ask questions and those kinds of things. And that's really where, action speaks louder than words, because if you do say that, and that is truly your intention, then when you're in those exchanges, there better be that respect, there better be that safe feeling. And especially as a leader, I think if what you're wanting is individuals on your team to be open to what you might be instructing them, it doesn't just happen in that one moment. It's really culture that you're trying to establish.
And Kelly, I think something that people have been taught is the feedback sandwich, where you say something positive, then you say something constructive, and then something. And actually, I don't think that's a good technique. I think that what happens is that people are hip to that. And so I actually have a friend who was giving some positive feedback, and the recipient says, and waiting for the negative thing because they were used to the sandwich. And I think using that sandwich is kind of a gimmick. And people are just, or once they get the good thing, they're waiting for that bad thing. And so I think that feedback is more like a salad. It needs to be mixed up. And I don't think it should be 100% bad or 100% good, but I think the sandwich gimmick doesn't really work.
Right. I think you're right, because I think that that points back to authenticity, and we can all detect disingenuine communication. That's like, don't
Right.
feed me that. Okay, Emily's face has popped in a couple of times to me, so it looks like we've got some questions. So I don't want to just hoard the time with you. So Emily, what questions have you got for us?
Well, I loved the specificity around the conversation about feedback. And we had a question about diving deeper into the coaching conversation that you brought up earlier, Dr. Friedman. So how does that actually happen? Does the organization pay for it and then the person has access to it? How do people know when to ask for a coach, at what level? Or is it something that people should always be thinking about as they're going through their career? Can you give us a little bit more advice around specifics around accessing coaching?
I'm sure that there are people on this call who are more knowledgeable about coaching than I am, but I'll tell you what I know. At Baylor, in terms of the initial remediation for people with lapses or concerns about professionalism, we use a technique that was devised at Vanderbilt College of Medicine, and it's called a cup of coffee. And it has a planned escalation if the initial intervention isn't successful, where the intervention increases and it continues into termination if the efforts aren't successful. The initial conversation is a relatively casual, structured conversation where you tell the individual about a concern that's been raised that is a perceived concern, and that that isn't in line with the standards expected at Baylor College of Medicine. And then there's a brief conversation, and so it's not really coaching. It's just an initial conversation about the perception of their behavior and the fact that that kind of behavior is not conducive to better relationships. It's not conducive to better patient care, and that they need to think about what they can tweak, that this is an opportunity for self-reflection, and this particular cups of coffee do not go on your HR record. They're not reported to the chairman of your department. So it's an opportunity to keep it a very confidential conversation between the two of us, where they get to think through the behavior and recognize that it's not a successful tactic, and to suggest that they think of something else. There are people, actually, so when I've looked at our statistics, and I think it's something like 87% of people who have a cup of coffee never get another concern raised about them. So it's a pretty successful approach, because I think a lot of people behave badly and they're really, really not aware of it. And when they hear that this has bothered someone, or that someone actually reported them, they are very remorseful. I mean, the responses are very varied, actually, but somehow or other, people are able to sort of tweak their behavior and don't get another concern. Some people, of course, get continued concerns, and I think that that's where coaching is helpful. Coaching can be very expensive, and depending on your organization, and they may or may not be willing to pay for it. At Baylor, the Employee Assistant Program gives 3 sessions of free coaching to any employee who requests it. Now, I think 3 sessions is really a very brief exposure to the benefits of coaching, but I think more than anything, it would give someone a flavor for it, so they would know if they wanted to pursue it on their own. So in the vast majority of cases, it's not paid for by the institution. However, when leaders come, almost all the leaders are assigned a coach, or they get a coach as part of the recruitment package. So that is more, as a leader, that's what happens, and it is considered part of the recruitment package. And so I think it's like a lot of other things, that if you don't ask, you don't know. And that's another thing that women frequently don't ask. You know, they just think that the boss will take care of them, and that it's going to be equal for everyone. And I keep saying, I don't think it's a conspiracy, but I think that if you don't ask for stuff, you don't get it. You know what they say, if you don't ask your own mother, she's not going to give you ice cream. So, you have to ask. So I think that in terms of getting coaching, I think you could ask the chairman of your department or whoever your executive leaders are, if it's available. Some institutions have a number of coaches who are on their faculty, and they offer, and Baylor also had a full-time coach who left, unfortunately, and was able to offer long-term coaching to individuals, but they actually left relatively recently. But so I think the way you get coaching is you have to ask for it. And then if it isn't an option that it's offered and financially supported by an organization, you have to do your best to find a good coach and pay for it yourself. But I think it's helpful because, I think another thing women aren't usually that good at, and, these are unbelievable generalizations. And I happen to know on this call, there are people who are amazing at this, but in general, a lot of women aren't that tuned into negotiation skills. And that's something that a coach can work with you, so that when you go, like I said, prepare, and they can help you make your presentation so that it's the most effective. So there are lots of uses for coaches. Anyway, I regret sorely that I never had a coach, and that is actually an enormous regret of mine, because I've been successful in many realms, but I feel like a coach could have helped me so much. And I think it would have also helped, I keep saying it's lonely at the top. I mean, a coach is also a sounding board, and that's extremely helpful. So anyway, I'm a big fan.
One of the things that I think is really interesting, and I don't know why it's just dawning on me now, but I think that when you reach a certain level of your career too, that one-on-one coaching makes a lot of sense, because by that point you have developed strengths and challenges that, we all can think of. Oh God, what I hate the most is this. Well, that's probably something you need to be coached on overcoming if what you want to do is, step into that next leadership role. And so it's not just a matter of observing and taking things in and, having mentors or those kinds of, observational things that we use to grow our professional skills, but to have that one-on-one, especially once you've reached a certain level of your professional achievements, is probably
well, I think the higher up you are, the harder it is to get feedback. I mean, I was the chairman of a department for over 20 years, and no one ever said I didn't do anything perfectly. I'm honest. I'm being honest with you, and because you're the chairman, and or you're the leader, and so and I mean, I was doing plenty of things wrong, and I feel like I could have done much better if I had gotten some input from someone, a trusted someone.
And who knows? I mean, when you think about those times where, maybe somebody, and this goes back a little bit to the gender thing, but that's because of Ignite's focus on enhancing women's growth, but where maybe the male candidate was selected over the female candidate, and behind closed doors, someone might ask, why him and not her? Well, she just never seemed to take an interest in blah, 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 or she never was at blah, blah, blah. And that's it. That's the innocuous thing that, prevented. And if only somebody had coached her that, hey, what you might think is maybe, optional is considered in